Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to be here for several reasons, and I love the introduction, particularly from, as a faculty member in my life, having taught women's studies. The significance of what we're doing here tonight is so important, but also, as Dean Nate talked about, the idea of an intellectual community. That is indeed why I have chosen all of my life to work in a college. I see no end in sight for that because I believe deeply in what we do. So it's with great pride that I'm here to welcome you this evening and certainly set the stage for what is going to be a dynamic speaker this evening, I should say. We are all excited to welcome Lilly Ledbetter to our campus. She is a committed social justice activist and a political activist, though I think it's fair to say that she didn't plan to play those roles, and we're going to hear more about that momentarily. I think it's so appropriate that she's here at a community college, very much so because our mission, as was described earlier, is about empowering our students to change their lives and enriching the life of our community. Many times that means that we play an activist role in our community to do so. For those of you who don't know her story, Ms. Ledbetter worked as a salaried worker at the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in Gadsden, Alabama for almost 20 years. She suffered from harassment and discrimination at the company, and she started at the same pay as her male counterparts, but that gap widened considerably as she approached retirement. Ms. Ledbetter learned from an anonymous source that she was earning $500 a month less than the lowest paid man and $1,500 a month less than the highest paid man. These were men who did the same job as she did. When she complained, they assigned her to lifting tires. Isn't it interesting how people try to silence you? But Lilly Ledbetter was ready for some heavy lifting on behalf of working women across this country. Ms. Ledbetter filed formal charges with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She sued, claiming pay discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Pay Act of 1963. In 2007, the Supreme Court ruled against her. They did not focus on discrimination, but rather on the fact that she did not sue within the statute of limitations. This was despite the fact that Ms. Ledbetter only learned of the pay discrimination when she was close to retiring. But the story did not end there. In response to the Supreme Court decision, the 111th United States Congress amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964, stating that the 180-day statute of limitations for filing an equal pay lawsuit resets with each discriminatory paycheck. They changed the rules because of Lilly Ledbetter. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was signed into law by President Barack Obama on January 29, 2009. And although she never received the money denied her, she fought in support of others who may suffer such inequality. She continues to be an outspoken advocate for pay equality for a just and fair America. Tonight, we are so fortunate to have her here to speak to us and to share her story with us at Montgomery College at our Germantown campus, to tell her story in her own words. So without further ado, I welcome Ms. Ledbetter to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm indeed honored to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It is indeed an honor to be on a college campus. I love it. There's not a place I like better than to be near the younger generation and those who instruct them, to make sure that what happened to me and my family hopefully will never happen to anyone in this audience. And there's much work left to be done, and that's why I continue talking about my journey and my experiences today. And we can make a difference, but it takes a lot of us to do that. One thing about, I was noticing on the video while I came in, the bad part about getting famous, you have to be careful how often you wear that red jacket. My daughter said, "Hey, Mom, that red jacket must retire," because she sees it in so many photos. But that's okay. It was a good jacket, and I still wear it, so it's not completely retired. But my journey from rural Alabama, and as you can tell by my accent, as the New York Times termed it, I do have a southern drawl. If you can get past it, I do have a good story. But my story is not so unusual because it's not only Lilly Ledbetter, it's everybody. It's each person in this room. It belongs to you and touches each one of you in one way or another. I want to start out by sharing a little bit about my journey in life. I grew up in Alabama, in the poorest rural county of the state. And I had big dreams. I had the American dream of having the best job possible with the best benefits and pay, and to have a family. And then someday I could enjoy the fruits of my labor. But it didn't quite work out that way. Prior to going to Goodyear, I worked for Jacksonville State University Assistant Financial Aid Director, spending money, which was a great job, especially when you're spending someone else's money. And then I went to H&R Block. It was a district manager managing 16 locations. And Goodyear built the radial division in Gadsden, Alabama, to a plant that was built in 1929. In fact, when that plant opened in 1929, President Hoover pushed a button in Washington, D.C. that raised the flag on the first opening day. That plant had been very successful, but I knew radial tires was the way of the future. And Goodyear had been written up in Business Magazine and all the other leading magazines stating how they were going to implement a new philosophy in that radial division. And that was the way I believed in management, team effort, team concept. And I wanted to be a part of that. I'd never wanted to work. Had no desire to have a job at Goodyear until then. I started applying in 1978. I was hired February 5th, 1979. I was hired as a first-line manager in the tire production plant in the radial division. I worked there for 19 years and 10 months, thinking that I was doing well because no one ever told me I was not. I want to give you some dates to think about while I present my story. But 1979, I hired in February the 5th. I worked in every section of that factory through my career except shipping. I never worked in shipping. I spent 2 years in the mailroom, and there was never any job too hard or too dirty that I didn't do, because being a first-line manager, you've got some hands-on work in that capacity. But in early 1998, I went into work, and it took 25 years seniority to rate a day shift. So all my career, I worked night shift. I went into work one evening, reached into my mail place at work, and found this note someone had left me showing my pay versus those 3 men. We had the exact same job, exact same job. The highest paid one was almost $5,400. The lowest paid one was within $600 of my pay, more than mine. Now that was only the base pay, because first line managers got overtime because we were required to work so many hours until we had to get the overtime pay, or our union men and women would have been making more than we did. There would not been an incentive to be there. When I saw that note, I was devastated, I was humiliated. I just couldn't believe it. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to hide. I looked around to see who might be looking, to see if I could figure out who left that tip. I couldn't. No one was looking. I thought, how in the world will I ever go out and do an 12-hour shift ahead of me with all of this knowledge now, not knowing who gave me the tip, not knowing how many people know it, and how they've laughed behind my back by getting the labor and the work for so less money. But I finally mustered up enough courage and went out and did my job. But halfway through the night, it suddenly hit me. My retirement is based on my salary. My 401k was 10%, matched by 6% from Goodyear. My contributory pension that had kicked in from after the first 6 months, it was a percentage of my pay, matched by a percentage from Goodyear. And today, my Social Security all is based on what I earned during those working years. So I was shortchanged through those years, and I'm still shortchanged today and will be for the rest of my life, and there's actually nothing in the law that allows me to correct it. I got home the next morning and told my husband I must file a charge with the EEOC unless he objected. He was already retired. And I said, I can tell you now, if I start, we will be in this at least 8 years, because there's not a quick fix to a case like this. Corporations have a lot of money. They can drag these cases on and wear out the client. They can wear out you and your money, and you want to give up and quit. He said, what time do you want to leave? He supported me from then all the way up until his death in December of '08. We drove to Birmingham, which is 75 miles from where I live, and he waited for me, and I was very, very fortunate. I got an interviewer at the Equal Employment Commission in Birmingham, Alabama, that she drug out of me all of those gory details, because you're embarrassed. Can you imagine if your president of your university had to go in and say, I'm the president of this college, but they don't pay me fair? I didn't feel very good going in and having to sound like a complainer and saying I'm a manager. I was supposed to be the person who solved problems, not the person who presented them. I did not want that title of being a troublemaker. I wanted to try to fit in and not make waves. But that interviewer that I got has been praised, and I've done extra film training for the Equal Employment Commission across the nation now, simply based on her interview for me, because if that person feels bad that day and they don't get all of the information like the lady did on that day in early 1998, then the lawyers won't have the information which they need when they get to trial. After many months, the Equal Employment Commission called me and said, you've got one of the best cases we've ever seen, but you may want to get your own attorney and try to press forward because we're backlogged and understaffed. I found a young attorney in Birmingham, Alabama by the name of John Goldfarb. He was with a large firm, the second largest in Birmingham. Goodyear, of course, had the largest. And I had the second largest, but he took my case pro bono because people in middle class America, we don't have funds to hire an attorney to represent us in the last 8 years. So he took the case, and he said, whatever you get, the firm gets 50%. I said, it's fine, because once I saw that note, my case at that point in my life was not about the money. My money was gone. I needed it when my family was young and struggling, and we were trying to pay the mortgage and college tuition and buy high school athletic gear and equipment and go for training and do all these things that normal American families do. I needed that money then to have a better food at my home, better quality, better lifestyle, better education funds. Well, that's when my family needed that money. But it was not about the money. At the moment I saw that note, it was about what was right. And if it's right, it is. If it's not, it's not. And you can't make it anything else. And I knew the law was on my side. But when John Goldfarb took my case, he started working on it, and we tried. He requested a jury trial, and those are hard to get as well. But we finally got to federal court in my home county in January of 2003. Now, I filed the charge. I'm already 5 years down the road. 2003, we get to federal court, and after a week in the court system and testimony, from both sides, the jury came back on Friday with a verdict of $3.8 million. That was the most wonderful verdict I had ever heard. That was the happiest moment of my life, although it didn't last very long. The judge asked the foreman of the jury to take a seat, and he explained to the courtroom how me only having the fact that I was a female based on the unequal pay for equal work, I was only entitled to $300,000. So my $3 million suddenly dropped to $300,000. Back pay, you can only go back 2 years. And if you remember hearing any of the objections to the Ledbetter bill when we were lobbying and trying to get it passed, was about how people would come out of the woodwork. They'd probably use this like a savings plan, women would. They might work 30 years and then they would retire, and their families might even file the charges. Well, it's not a savings plan. And if you're looking for a large sum, I would suggest buying lottery tickets. You got a better opportunity to get a large sum. Because in my case, that $360,000 dropped immediately. And remember, had I got that money, the law firm got 50%, and I had to pay income tax, federal and state, on most of it because it was in lieu of wages. I would have had less than $50,000. And I had spent $35,000 to $40,000 of my own money out of my pocket. That was 2003. Goodyear appealed to the 11th Circuit. I'm told that's the worst circuit in the country you want a case to be heard in. In fact, my 13-year-old grandson could have written a better response that came to me from that hearing in Atlanta, Georgia. And then my attorneys appealed, and they called me in the summer of '06, and they said, Lilly, we're going to the Supreme Court. They've agreed to hear your case. I couldn't believe it. That was so amazing to know that a case from Alabama, a landmark case, was going to the Supreme Court. But I knew that was the highest court in the land, and hopefully they would do what's right. Because from day one, the law had been on my side, or that firm would have never taken my case in the beginning, because that was how they were counting on getting paid for all of their hours in the work. But we were heard in the Supreme Court in November of 2006, the Monday after Thanksgiving. My daughter and I traveled to Washington, and we were in the Supreme Court for that case that day. We left my husband at home with a home health care nurse. Life goes on. That's another reason you don't hear about a lot of these cases, because people can't last for 9 and 10 years while these cases are going on for you to get your final verdict, whatever the outcome. But it was not right, and I could never let it go. My husband continued to support me. In the meantime, he'd had 2 major back surgeries, and then he started developing cancer. He had one on the right ear, one on the left ear, and then the left side of his face had just been removed in October of '06, and skin from the right leg grafted to his face. And he was at home trying to get his strength back when I went to the Supreme Court. In '07, he started 34 radiation and chemo treatments on the side of his head, and then that caused him to have a stroke in his left eye. We had 6 surgeries on his eyes, and that was another devastation to the family and a downgrade. At any given time, I could have given up, but that was not who I was. It was not who he was. We stayed with it, and I continued to go back and forth to Washington then until through all this, but then the verdict did not come out until '07. We had started to a luncheon with our church group in May of '07 when I got the call. The lawyer said, Lilly, you don't have to respond to the media. We will handle it. Don't worry about it. Just refer them to us. NBC kept calling, and I said, when do you want to do the interview? Oh, they said as soon as possible. I said, okay, I live at 1206. Come on up. I opened the door, and here they came with all their camera crew. They did the hookup, and Williams from Washington interviewed me over the phone for Brian Williams's NBC program that evening. NBC got their money's worth. They ran that for a long time. They ran it for about a month out of Washington on the Today Show, and then Birmingham affiliate ran it for another month. So it wasn't anything unusual for people to call me and say, I just saw you on TV again, but it was the same thing. The next day, CNN called, and they came in and interviewed me. It's the same camera crew. They hire freelance people out of Birmingham. I have to tell you, too, your students will love this. The NBC guys, when they came in that day, which was the same people the next day, he said, now, we're through with the interview. Said, how about going in the kitchen and just get the mixer out like you're making a cake. I said, I've just lost $3.8 million and you want me to bake a cake? I don't think so. I don't think so. He said, well, really the problem was my kitchen wasn't too tidy. I really didn't want NBC in my kitchen. But they looked around and he said, oh, you got a coffee maker. I said, go make some coffee. My husband said, oh, you want coffee? I've got some. He'd already made a pot. He said, no. Said, we want her to make it. So we pour out my husband's pot of coffee and I make a pot of coffee. The next day, the same two people come back for CNN. And they go, well, you should be up to doing that cake today. I said, nope, not doing a cake today either. He said, well, we did the coffee yesterday, so we don't have to do something different. He said, how about getting your mail out of the mailbox? I said, sure, will be a long walk because my box is at the post office. He said, oh, you got a paper box. So he had my husband to put the papers back in the box and me go out and get them. And then he said, oh, I know. He said, you got a teapot? I said, oh, sure, everybody's got a kettle, I guess. So we put the kettle on and I make a cup of tea and I'm on CNN drinking tea. For whatever that's good for. But the same crew came back a week later for Norman Lear, and we made a lot of videos. But don't ever believe what you see on TV because they rearranged my house. They took the family pictures down. They moved the tables and the chairs. I mean, I might as well met them somewhere because it didn't look like my home. But that was quite an experience. But it didn't change anything. I never figured that out why they wanted me in the kitchen unless that was sending a sublime message about putting the woman in her place. But the thing is, then after that verdict came out, I was telling one of the students earlier, there's an article that stated I hit a nerve, and I did. What people understood across the country, this was not only in the South, it was all over the United States, and it hits every family about unequal pay for equal work. It's a national epidemic. I thought in the beginning it was just a deep Southern problem, but it is not, because that's the only place I had ever lived and worked. But within just a matter of about 6 weeks or 2 months, there were over 300 cases where judges had cleaned off their calendar based on that 180-day technicality. That wasn't right. They had nothing to do with pay. But the thing is, this had to be changed back, because what those 5 justices did when they ruled in the Ledbetter case, they changed the law. That ruling changed the law, because the Bazemore case, it was prior to the Ledbetter, he got his award. It's based on the same thing. Paycheck accrual rule, 180-day rule. You have 180 days if you're still getting a check and find out you're being discriminated against. Justice Alito and Chief Justice Roberts had just gone on the Supreme Court. Justice Alito wrote the opinion. He said I should have filed my charge in the early 80s when I got that first discriminatory paycheck, even though I didn't know it and even though I had no way to prove it. But I should have filed a charge at any time I got one of those discriminatory paychecks. Justice Ginsburg wrote a dissent, and she read every word in the Supreme Court. And it touched the Congress, and it touched the people across this nation. And it still touches me today. When I get really tired of my travels and work, I read her dissent. And she said these people don't understand what it's like in the real world, and they don't. People don't stand around a water cooler discussing their pay, and even if you knew you were making less than another person, that might not mean it's based on discrimination. And she challenged Congress to change the law back. And she said the ball is in your court. There's another video running on the website now that has been made, and I talk about when that ball went to Congress, Lilly went with it, and I did. Within the 1st of July, my lawyer, who didn't get a dime, and his firm lost money, bought me a plane ticket, and he said, we're going to Washington. He and I traveled to Washington, and we were in Congress that next morning. And there was a big press conference, and then there was a hearing. And he sat directly in behind me, and I testified before Congressman George Miller's committee. And the United States Chamber of Commerce is send in lawyers to argue against people like me when we're trying to set the record right and testify for the right of the little people. But the Congress Chamber of Commerce sent this lawyer in. His name was Molan. He came that time, and he came the second time when I testified before the House. But he said after that time he would never come back. But at trial, I was very fortunate. I had 2 women who came forward and testified on my behalf. They asked one of the women why she never complained about her salary, because she was even making below the minimum for the job that she had. She said, I was a divorcee with supporting a handicapped son, and we lived paycheck to paycheck. I couldn't afford to even ask about my pay, because you see, Goodyear did exactly what most corporations do today. You cannot ask about your pay. You're not allowed to ask your superior about where you stand. They will not reply. They will not give you an answer. Goodyear tells the media even today, they wished I had come to them first. I did. My boss said, you're listening to too much BS from the men, except he said the full words. That's not right. That's what you go to them for. I believe the chain of command. That's what we need to do. When we have a question about our employer and our jobs, we need to be able to ask our immediate superior. But it was not easy to stand up to a major corporation, and after I made my charge, they retaliated and gave me a job lifting heavy Hummer tires. My job was to inspect those tires each night and load them, get them off of a truck, and I have no idea how much they weigh. I didn't have a hoist. I was given an improper lighted work area, and I knew the handwriting on the wall would be that I would get trapped into making a mistake and be fired. So they came out with an early out in September of 1998, and I didn't have a lawyer at that time, and I signed and took it. My lawyer told me later that was the worst mistake I made. I should have stayed employed. But the jury was very upset. The foreman of the jury told my attorney that the only thing, see, they were not advised that there would be a cap, so they put all of the money into that one lump sum, because when you have a case like this, you're gambling on your jury as well as everything else for the system to work in your favor. The jury worked for me, although they put all of the money into one sum, that $3 million. That was to offset those lost overtime hours that I did not get paid fairly for, or my base pay, or my retirements. But then they did not know that there was a cap, so that was all taken away. I lost my age discrimination case and the other 2. There were 4 lawsuits. I didn't mind losing the 2 of them, but I really wanted the age. The age discrimination case is even harder to prove. And the jury wanted to sum up. There was one member of the jury that wanted to leave early that Friday. Her son had a ball game, and she didn't want to come back on Monday because they pull federal jurors from outside counties, not directly in your home county. So you never know. But after the Supreme Court ruling, Goodyear sent me a bill for $3,165 to pay for their printing cost. The Birmingham attorney sent it to the medias, and the Washington lawyer sent it to the 2 law schools. But life goes on, as I stated, and it's really hard on families. It's hard on individuals. You find out who your true friends are. You find out where you stand. And I stayed neutral. I would not come out and support anybody running for president. I went to Denver to speak at the Democratic Convention in '08. I went not endorsing Obama. I went like Ron Reagan did for John Kerry. He spoke up at the convention when John Kerry was running, and I went to, and they told me that when you come off that stage, that first reporter is very powerful. Be careful what you say. But when I got caught up with the people in the audience, and I could see the tears running down their faces when I talked about the injustices of the American family, when women are working 2 jobs through the week and another day on the weekend, and they rotate their bills each month. They don't pay the power bill this month, or they don't pay the gas bill. They rotate their bills, and they're not putting decent food on the table. And they can't get food stamps because they make a little too much on their work. And their kids are just getting by with whatever they can scrounge for till mother gets home. And then she's too tired to check on homework and to make sure they have proper meals. When I talked about that, and what I talk about what I'm talking about here this evening, it has nothing to do with either party. It's a bipartisan problem. It's civil rights. It's a human right that each of us is entitled to as an American citizen, or actually any human being in the world. And we women, we work for our families. That's why you can be a single woman. You still have family contact. But I walked off that stage that evening and got caught up in the audience, and Senator McCain had just made the statement that the women's problem was we did not have enough education or training. If we'd get more education and training, we could get paid properly. So when she said, "When did you endorse Obama?" I said, "Right now." So from that day on, I stuck with the president, because really that was where my heart was, and that's why I campaigned for him. I told the class I spoke with here today, I saw the young people across this nation doing some fantastic work on his campaign. If I had been told what I saw, I don't think I would have believed it, except I saw it and witnessed it. But it was just unreal how hard those young people worked and the sacrifices they made. But it's because we believe in what we're doing. You can make a difference, but it takes a lot of people to work together. I really had that great plan that I would work hard and save, and then someday I could retire. But what happened to me is what's happening across this world, and a lot of times too. When I got home in December of '08 from going to New York and doing the 2020 segment with Elizabeth Vargas, I found my husband cold. He had died that morning about 10. He'd actually died with a massive stroke because the cancer wore his body out. He had lost 50 pounds, and he was just so weak he could hardly stay up a whole day. But he had supported me, and he knew the bill would sign and it would become law. So when I went to the White House, my daughter's family went with me. My 3 grandsons sat on the front row, and that was the first time that the women's groups in Washington, D.C. had been to the White House in 8 years. It was quite a big day and a celebration to be back in the White House and to be there and share doing something for the families across this nation. Because once that verdict came out in May of '07, it was no longer about Lilly Ledbetter. It was about my daughter, my granddaughter, and all the women across this nation and their families. The last 2 years, I've been on a lot of military bases talking to families and their representatives, and what I find out is what happened to me is the national norm as well. Women are outliving their spouses by 10 years, and when our spouses die, we normally lose 50% or all in some cases, or 75% of our income, but all the expenses go up. And that makes it very difficult for women to stay self-sufficient in their own homes. So they're moving in with their sons and their daughters, and now they're raising their families, and there's their grandma in the house too. It's a hardship on families, and it's an added burden and an added expense, and that mother doesn't want to be there either. In the military case, when they get uprooted and transferred, she has to go too. This is not right in this country, because women from my generation on, we have held full-time jobs, and we've worked, and we should have been paid what we legally earned and was entitled to under the law. What really got me, and for me to live with myself, why did I get fooled? Why did I buy in? Well, Goodyear, from the day I went to work, had government contracts, and they still had them when I left. And that's why I thought their feet were being held to the fire in order to continue to be, they would have to be treating us fair and adhering to federal laws and guidelines, but they were not. I'd like to open it up for questions, and if you have a question, I'll be happy to answer it. I'll tell you the first answer first without you asking. No, I don't know who gave me the note, but after I did get the note in about a week, well, after the case had been filed and Goodyear had been notified, I did get in the mail the last evaluation sheet of the tire room, because that's the only thing we had other than the wage history at trial, because Goodyear said they no longer had my personnel file. And the judge asked one of the Goodyear people on the stand what happened, and they said they thought they burned it. And he said, let me explain the law to you Goodyear lawyers. When a case is filed, you have to maintain all of the records until the case is closed. But basically what they had done, I worked there for 20 years. I probably didn't have 6 evaluations in that whole 20 years. And those only came up when they were about to have a salary cutback or a downgrade. But I don't know who gave me the note, and there will be a book published February the 28th, 2012. You can go Amazon now and read about it. In fact, you can pre-order. The Random House in New York is publishing it. The name of it is Grace and Grit. It's about my fight and my struggles for fairness at Goodyear and beyond. But the book will be out February 28th, 2012. I hope you'll read it, because it talks about my journey for fairness in the workplace. And hopefully there'll be a movie. We have some inquiries already, but I've held out for it to be done right, because it is historical. Because my goal in life today, if I can keep any one young person from getting trapped in what I did, my life is well worth it. But you can't start out behind. You have to start out equal. So, and there are jobs out there. Don't think they're not. They are. And they do pay well. You just have to search them out, negotiate, and do your research and do your homework and hold out for the good ones. Any questions? Yes.
I have asked Genevieve Carminati, who is the coordinator of the Women's Studies program for Montgomery College, to do the microphone on that side. And Nancy Nyland over there is going to do the microphone on that side. And Nancy, by the way, was awarded the Women's Studies Award, On Whose Shoulders We Stand, in 2011. And Genevieve?
Yes, you mentioned in your presentation that once you filed a complaint, things got bad for you at the workplace. My question to you is, what advice do you have to young people that know they're being paid less, but are in a subservient position, and if they file a complaint, you know, the situation's going to get difficult. So what advice do you have for young people? How do they go about becoming successful?
Right. The main thing is we need to get paycheck fairness passed, then they'll know. It passed a House twice, and then last November it fell in the Senate. We came up 2 votes short. But we need that passed, and had that been the law in my day, then we could have found out without retaliation. But you're exactly right. And the problem is you have to be ready to withstand it, because I filed a lawsuit in the early 80s when I was threatened by my superior that if I didn't go sleep with him and have sex with him, that I would come Monday, I wouldn't have a job. So I called EEOC on the phone and convinced them to file a charge to keep my job. And I won the right to sue in the early 80s. And so Goodyear said, well, what do you want? I said, I want my other job back, and this guy put on the back side of somewhere. And so they did. They gave me my job back. They gave me what I wanted. And that was exactly right. The laws are there. But I tell the students and young people today, when they go to work, they need to know what their rights are. They need to know what does Title VII do for them. What was the equal pay? Know the laws about pay and how many hours, and what do you do if you're required to work through your lunch, like the Walmart women. You need to know the law. That's the main thing that will help them there. But when you file a charge, you might as well be prepared. What happened to me in the early 80s, no one spoke to me, no one had anything to do with me, but I had a job that I knew, and I was fortunate to have that job, and I could keep performing. It didn't bother me. I put my shoulders back, my head high, and I did my job night out and night in. And you can survive like that. And then these temporary people, I used an example today in class where there are corporations that still doing this. There's a major home place now that pays their young African Americans $8.50 an hour, and their white males $9 an hour for summer work. But they tell them, if you discuss your pay, you won't work here. Well, they're temporary people, so they discussed it. That's how they knew, and they had the same job. Well, it's like one guy said in that group, said, well, why didn't you quit? She said, I needed the money to come back. But you have to be prepared when you take a stand that you will be retaliated against. And it's not easy. And people who call me at home now and ask me, I've got this case, and they start explaining to me what's happened to them, I tell them the procedure. First procedure, they call equal employment, make an appointment. They go in and they talk to an interviewer, and then they are told whether or not they have a case, and sometimes they can start an investigation. And sometimes if you get people at your workplace to file as many as 2 or 3, and there are certain cases like that, that you can start an investigation and the company will not be notified who started it. And I was told by the Goodyear people that when my headlines hit the paper, everybody, African American, minority, and female in management salary jobs got an automatic $1,000 per month raise. $1,000. That's so when equal employment came in. And what people need to do when there is an investigation, don't buckle down, but tell the truth. But I saw at Goodyear, a lot of people traded off in the early 80s on my case. They traded off in the 1998. Got a question? Right here. Right here.
Hi.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I want to make a comment that as a retired career federal employee, when I was working in the 70s and the 80s, you don't hear about marital discrimination anymore, as in, gee, you know, that guy is married and he's got kids, so he's going to get the promotion. I do want to congratulate you on your courage. I would also like to know if there is any way to get around the silence about pay, because that was something that we were told, and I worked in human resources for the federal government. We were not supposed to be talking about our pay.
Thank you. Thank you. There's more cases filed by federal government employees than you can imagine. And I didn't tell the audience, I didn't tell you this, but when I got to the Supreme Court, each side has 30 minutes. My lawyer got up for 20 minutes and presented my case, and then Goodyear's lawyer got up for 20 minutes and defended their side, and then the United States lawyer from the Equal Employment Office in Washington took Goodyear's side for the last 10 minutes. And he said, we can't let this case go forward, but there'd be loodles of people filing lawsuits. Well, the law had always been on the books. It never had a lot of lawsuits because of the description I just talked about this evening. It took me 9 years to get the final verdict, and it was hard. I couldn't even go on vacation without calling my law firm for all those years and telling him where I could be reached, because in case something came up, he had to be able to reach me. But that's not right. But the United States government took that side. Now why? I know I have my thoughts. I think it was who was in the White House at the time. But still, and Roberts and Alito had, and I will share this too, that when I testified before Ted Kennedy's committee, his staff had put together 4 charts. They were big as this podium right here. And 2 of them was what Roberts and Alito said in confirmation hearings, and the other ones had what they had ruled, how they had ruled on cases since they had been on the Supreme Court, and they were totally not the same people. In fact, Senator Kennedy said it's almost like it's not even the same individual, because they had not even come close. But you're exactly right. When I went to the Supreme Court and my case was presented, somebody handed me one of their cases that day. And I have cases in my house that's been mailed to me of federal employees, and they try to keep you down. I'll give you another. Do we have another question immediately? I'll give you another example. I'll have one over here in just a minute. But I was in Arizona a couple of years ago, and the man took a day's vacation from a research firm to come in and work with us. And his co-worker, who's a medical doctor in research, she said, boy, that's why I'm glad I do research for the government. Said, I know I'm paid what you people are paid. He said, are you sure about that? So she got to checking. Being a federal employee, she could find out, but they didn't make it easy. So she had to go over to this building and file a request to find out what she made compared to her peers. Then she had to go over to another place on a certain day at a certain time. I mean, it wasn't easy. So during the week that I was there, though, she had found out that she was making $35,000 less than those men. So she made an appointment to see her superior, and she wanted to know how she rated. And he said, well, I don't know, what'd you bring that up for? And she said, well, I'm just curious to know if I made what my peers make. And he said, well, you're due for an evaluation in 6 weeks, we'll do it then. She pushed her chair back and said, I better be making what they are. So I don't know how that came out, but just because I was in town and all of that discussion came up, she had assumed that she was making what the white males were making in that research lab run by the United States government. And that happens time and time again, and it's not right. But a person has to understand, I tell people too, when they make a decision to step up and step out, you've got to be a strong individual, you need your family support, and you need a strong faith to make it. Have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, first of all, I am really happy to be a part of your presentation. And then you are an example, a good example for all of us women here, especially in college. I heard also on your speech that you were saying that you were trapped into making a mistake so they can fire you. And how do you, how is going to be?
I didn't hear the last part. Remember, I worked in manufacturing. I've lost some of my hearing, so speak up just a little bit more in the microphone. I didn't hear the last part.
I heard in your presentation that you said you were trapped into making a mistake so they can fire you. How do you advise, especially women in workplace, when a situation like that? You lived it in difficult situation. You walked very courageously in that difficult situation. What would be your advice for us to live courageously when it comes to the situation like this, difficult situation? They would trap you into that you made a mistake and then they can fire you. What would be your advice for us?
Well, first of all, people have to have a standard that they live by wherever they're at. And when you work in a place, that needs to stay who you are. You stay true to yourself and who you are. But you need to network. You need to have people that you trust, and you understand their situations and they understand you. But also you have to keep a record of what's happening to you. And I've been criticized, especially on college campuses, for not sharing more with audiences how rough it was in that manufacturing environment, because they had never had any women much, and they'd never had them, it lasted 20 years either in that supervisory capacity. And it was very hard, but I felt like I was being a trailblazer. But one thing I did do right, and nobody has ever told me this, I did keep a record, and I kept it outside the plant. I did not keep it inside of things that happened, who said it, who did what on different days. And that diary was used when I went to trial or went to the hearing in the early 80s. But first of all, you need to have a network. And most corporations today, and I'm doing a lot of work. I was just in New York a few weeks ago with a top banking firm in the world, and they're trying to encourage the men in that group that they have employed to support the women and them network and work together, because you each, a man and a woman, brings a different perspective to the table, and it makes for stronger organizations. And these corporations now are figuring that out. But all of them have not. And the ones who don't, you don't want to stay with them. And while you're young, you can move out and move on, so to speak. But now you've got the computers, you've got all these records, and you've got all these reports that come out each year about who are the best corporations and the companies to work for women, what are the best jobs, what are the best paying jobs and the best treatment. But that's another reason that there are so many firms and businesses today run by women. It's because they become self-employed. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you truly did. Thank you so much.
Well, I wouldn't have had as good a deal in court if I had not had those two women. One of them still worked there. Yes. Who's got the mic? Over here. Okay.
Ms. Ledbetter, thank you very much for your presentation, your courage.
Thank you.
I wish this audience was packed, because your story is so compelling. I'd also like to offer my condolences on the loss of your husband. I can only begin to imagine your personal sacrifice. My question is the ERA. There's a lot of, I've been working with groups about trying to get the ERA passed. Would that have made a difference?
I don't know in my case, but it is, we do need ERA. And I do know it's being revived again around the country, and a lot of states I've been in that have not passed it, they want to. So they're trying, and I was in New York earlier this year with Representative Carol Maloney, and they have introduced it again and trying to get it passed in the state of New York. It should be passed. It should be. It should be. And what is good today, the men need to support all these different rules and laws and regulations, because it only strengthens the family. Okay.
I have a question. How many women were working with you at the time when you filed the case, and how often was you being evaluated? Were you evaluated by your employee, or what were discussed?
How often I was evaluated?
And
probably 6 times in 20 years.
How many women were working with you?
Not any. There was a woman on some of the other shifts, but Goodyear staggered it so that we never came in contact with each other. Somebody asked me why it wasn't a class action. I said there were too few women. And Kathy, who testified for me at trial, the one I talked about being a divorced mother, she had sold 22 years of seniority. She'd been a tire builder earlier and then was put into management. And it got so bad, she quit and sold her 22 years service, took her retirement, and she was a supervisor at Honda, took a personal day of vacation and came to testify for me. And she told him on the stand that it just got so rough, she had to let it go. And there was another lady that they put into management to train her, and she was on night shift for a month. And she asked about her pay difference. and the plant manager told her they were not giving her a damn dime, so she said, I'll take my old job back. She said, if this is all I'm getting paid, I'm staying on day shift and being a clerk. And she testified for me at trial, and she ended up getting 2 promotions and some raises, but she still retired with less money because they didn't make up for all those years when she didn't get her rightful pay. Got a question back here? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, just.
Speak up loud so I can hear you. Okay, we got one here. Okay. This is my political science student.
You said that the women with Walmart also had this problem. I know a little bit about it. Did they sued for the same kind of thing?
No.
They didn't sue?
No, they sued for, in fact, we got a mother of a lawyer that's working on one of those cases here tonight, but their suit was different. That was nothing like my case. Yes, different than mine.
The Supreme Court said that
they just sued.
Fail, so that's tough. Have a nice
well,
life,
yeah,
correct?
they just sued to try to have a class action suit.
Okay, are you doing anything with that? Trying to?
Not right now, I'm not. But I would if I was asked. But I'm not right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think we're all indebted to you for your courage and your strength. Could you just tell us, please, what does the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act say?
Very simple. It's the same law that was on the books prior. It's the same law. You can go online and Google it and look it up, and it's the same law, which says if you find out that you're being discriminated against and you're still getting a check based on that paycheck accrual rule, you can file your charge within 180 days. I was within the law. I had filed my charge once I found out immediately. I didn't even wait 180 days. Once I found out, and I was still getting paid, I was still working, so the law was on my side. And those 5 justices, now you need to follow the Supreme Court because this is not the only law they've changed. They've changed a lot of them in their ruling, and that's not their job. They're supposed to interpret what Congress meant by that law, and I don't think Congress would have ever meant to have gone out and them change it their way of thinking. But it's very simple. It's back, and we lobbied long and hard to try to keep no adjustments, no amendments to the law. So it's exactly like it was, except it has a different name. And I am so honored. I'm told in Alabama I'm probably the only one ever in that state with a bill named for them. And there's less than 35 in the history of the nation of having laws named for individuals. It's not common. But thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I just want to start off by saying that you are awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
An awesome public speaker. And I do have a question.
Okay.
I know that you said that when you got the piece of paper, that is when your world kind of changed for you.
Right.
But was it solely that piece of paper, or were there more factors involved?
It was the knowledge. It was just the knowledge of knowing my suspicions had been right and what that had meant to my family. Because in those few seconds when I looked at that paper, I think that's the sickest feeling I'll ever have in my whole entire life. Because when I saw that paper and people said, well, how did you know it was right? Well, the base pay, mine was $3,727 per month. So I knew mine was right to the dollar. There was no reason to suspect those others. And it was just the 4 first names. And it just changed my life forever. It'll never be back like it ever was before. But I became a better person. I'm more directed, and evidently there was a higher power who had a different plan for my life, because since that day, I've been a lobbyist, an advocate, and a public speaker, and out there every day and putting my life on the line, and it's not always fun. It's not like a group like this. It's a lot of criticism. People tell me I should have stayed home. I shouldn't have had that man's job, that there was men who needed that job. I shouldn't have had it. I said I didn't see the men's title on it. coming out for the Democratic Party in '08. Almost got evicted from my Southern Baptist church because, you know, that party is probably pro-choice, and that's not all that's there, but that was part of it. And when you come out publicly, it really puts you in a light that you better have a thick skin. Nobody agrees with you. Everybody does not agree with you. That's okay. Everybody is entitled to their opinion and their own ideals, but we each have to do what we physically believe in.
Thank you.
We have one more question here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Your experience gives us a good evidence, especially we social scientists, that actually gender inequality exists. And sometimes when we talk about in the classroom, maybe students think we are preaching, but your experience has convinced us that it actually exists. Now, my question is this. Because this is an experience that we have these days, even on the basis of national origin, on the basis of race or ethnicity. The fact that you are being paid less doing the same job as the men that were paid more than you, was it because of your gender, or it was because of other broader social structural factors of inequality that exist in society? Maybe our students would love to hear this. Precisely, were you being paid less because you are a woman, or because it was part of the broader structural problems of inequality in society?
Well, it was proved at trial that I was paid less simply because I was a woman. That's why the cap is on it. That's all I had, that I was a woman, and that's exactly why I was paid less. And it also helped the bottom line. It helped the white males be able to get more money. The African-American male who was ready to testify for me is seated in the hallway, which we never used his testimony. He was paid less too. He was the one who told me and my attorney that he got the $1,000 a month raise immediately. But he was paid much less too. But I was paid less simply because I was a woman. He was probably paid less because he was African American. That's all it took. And that happened to be a corporation that was hard to break into. They didn't want us there. So they had to have us because the government had the laws that did require them to hire us. So that did help that much. And I was entitled to that job. I happened to be very good at it. It was a good job for a woman. We're detailed, and it was sort of like coaching a ball team. So it was really a good job.
I think we have one more question.
One more question. Okay. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, you made it clear that you made public the note that you
Yes,
got.
sir. Yes, sir.
Did your former employer ever attempt to retaliate against who might have sent that note? Obviously, someone in payroll could have slipped you that note.
No, sir. The note, because see, we Goodyear Gadsden, the salary checks came out of Akron. No one in Gadsden, Alabama knew what we were paid. And when I filled out my paperwork when I hired in, they told me, the secretary said, don't ever discuss your pay or you won't have a job. And then the person over the training program, he told me whatever I did, never tell the man in human resources in Gadsden what my starting pay was, because they had changed the starting pay and they didn't want them to know. So it was a secret. It was a big secret on what everybody was getting paid, and it came out of Akron. But probably it was one of two people. Most likely it was one of my former bosses who was trying to help me out. They gave me that note, they had the information, and they gave me the note in order to let me know, and they saw I filed the charge and did something about it, and that's where the last evaluation sheet of the tire room, it probably came off of that sheet, and I didn't keep the note. I carried it in my pocket until I went to the equal employment, and I didn't turn it into them. They didn't ask for it, and I still don't have it, but my lawyer has that sheet that was mailed to me anonymously, and in the state where I live, anything that's mailed goes through Birmingham, Alabama. So if it came from Gadsden, Anniston, Jacksonville, I wouldn't know where it came from to try to narrow it down. No return address. But that's all we had to compare at trial. My lawyer could not get any information, and he was handicapped. One thing it'd be interesting to share with students, my attorney told me that I needed to go to trial dressed in a skirt suit and heels, at least 2-inch heels. Well, my thinking is every job's got a uniform. So my thinking was I had to go to trial and look more like a tire room manager than I did an executive. So I wore dark slacks and a black jacket and a white shirt the first day and a blue shirt the second day. And I wore loafers with a little bit larger heel, but it wasn't no 2-inch heel. And I went in looking like I could take that jacket off and roll my sleeves up and go to work out on the factory floor. And that's what you have to do. No matter what job you've got, every job's got a uniform, whether you realize it or not. But thank you for that question, because a lot of people want a note, narrowing it down on the note, but I do not know. But I would suspect that the #1 suspect would be a former boss, or it could have been the janitor, because oftentimes when the janitors worked there at night, they would go through the trash or things that people would have in their offices. And back in those days, they didn't shred like they do now. So they could have found it that way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you for being here.